Man, that looks washed out. 10, okay, looks good. Cool. All right, we're live. Okay. So I'm going to hop right into this. I'm just going to assume my sound and everything works just fine. So what I want to do today is give a presentation, as you may see from the title, on datums. So, oh, hi. So datums, you know, as a term, is a kind of loaded, right? There's a lot of different terminology we can use under this datums and datum reference frame concept. So as far as the terms go, what do we have? We have datum, datum feature, datum feature symbol. We have datum references. We have datum feature simulators. All right, so hi, Isabel and Augusto, and okay, Brazil. Is Brazil in the same time zone as East Coast time zone? Seems like it would be, right? But maybe Brazil has more than one time zone. I don't know. There always seems to be a couple people from Brazil in the chat, and as opposed to, you know, India, which I know I have some viewership from there, but I know it's whatever, 7.5 hours or however many and a half hours ahead, so it's not as easy to watch. Okay, datum feature simulators, and I should just use my notes, right? Datum features. Oh, and our datum reference frame. Right? This terminology is super confusing if you're just trying to learn the stuff, because it all looks the same, right? It's all these different versions of this one word. Some ways I remember it, right? The datum is a theoretical thing, right? It's a line, axis, point, plane, or combination of those items. And I'll talk about that soon. I really want to talk about order of precedence and kind of how the customized datum reference frames work here. And not because you'll put them in drawings all the time, but just because it's a good way to understand datums and datum reference frames. Okay, so the datum is this theoretical thing. And the problem with this is, you know, if you were talking about this with somebody else, you'd be like, oh, they might be talking about datum feature. You're talking about a datum, but you might just call them both datums, right? So you want to be careful depending on the level of discussion you're having. The datum feature is a physical thing, right? Physical. It's tempting to say part of part, but that's like, you know, bad grammar or whatever. Or, no, not bad grammar, but bad word choice. So I typically say physical portion of the part. So this can be all sorts of different things. This is not going to be an axis, plane, line, or point. This would be a cylinder, right? Whether internal or external, or it could be a width, right? Like a slot or a groove. It could be a surface, right? Whether it's a nice flat surface or some weird, you know, parabola, mathematically defined surface, all sorts of things. Now, back to where I can, right? I don't really need any words. A datum feature symbol is this, right? Don't, as far as I'm concerned, I don't really need a definition for that. We know what the symbol looks like, right? If we see this symbol, we know we've got to go on a scavenger hunt for what datum feature is there, and then we can figure out what datum we're going to extract. The datum reference, same thing, right? I don't even know what I would write as a written definition for that. Just look at the picture, right? It's part of your feature control frame. It tells you which datum you're going to use, right? You're going to look for the datum feature symbol, and you're going to figure out what the datum feature is, and you can figure out what the theoretical datum is. Datum feature simulators, no, between 2009 and 2018, 1994, they've changed the definitions a little bit. So for a while, there were, in 2009, there's theoretical datum simulators and physical datum simulators. I don't really care. I just call it datum feature simulators. In 2018 and 1994, I think they called them true geometric counterparts. The true geometric counterpart is like the theoretical thing, right? So if you have you're trying to get an axis, you take a perfect cylinder that expands in a real physical cylinder, and that'll tell you what the axis of the actual feature is. It's basically an unrelated actual mating envelope. And I'm really blanking on like the technical difference between them. If you know, you can put it in the chat, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the same thing as an unrelated actual mating envelope for most practical purposes. What do I mean by that? Let me expand a little bit. I know we're not all 100% on the same page. So say I have, right, a cylinder, right, and I've defined this hole, right, is going through a plate, right. So here's a hole in a plate, and we've defined this, right, as datum A. So the way we get the axis, right, this theoretical thing, from the physical feature, right, the physical feature is this hole, is we're going to take a perfect cylinder, right, and expand it in this hole, right. And it's free to expand until it touches enough spots to where it can't expand anymore. And what's going to limit that are these high points on the part. It's not taking an average or anything. It's a physical interaction, well, sort of, between a theoretical thing and a real thing. Now, this is going to be our TGC, or true geometric counterpart. It's really similar to the unrelated actual mating envelope. Like I said, I'm really blanking on what the exact difference is between them. When I teach this stuff, it's basically this is the picture for the unrelated actual mating envelope. Now, in real life, we're going to use some physical object to find that, right? It could be a gauge pen, a mandrel, all sorts of wacky stuff. It could be a CMM program, but you want to be aware of how this works. So you're dealing with different CMM software, make sure it's doing what you expect it to do. So that's our datum feature simulators. A datum reference frame is 3 mutually perpendicular planes. Now, this is the basis of the ASME system of doing things, right? It's a Cartesian coordinate system. We're going to have, right, as you might expect, I'll just switch to a new slide here. Let's start with our Cartesian coordinate system. We're going to have X, Y, and Z. And I'll have Z coming out of the page right now, but it don't matter too much. So these are going to be our translational degrees of freedom. Right? DOF is degrees of freedom. And I'll explain all that in a minute. That's why I'd really love to get that across in this presentation. All right, so these are going to move this way along an axis. So the way to think about this, if we have some object on our table here, it can translate right this way. This is translation. This is translation, right? Moving this way and this way. And it could also conceivably move in translation up and down. So here is our datum reference frame. So we're saying we're translating an X, and I know I can't hold it perfectly steady, right? And translating an Y. This is translation in Z. Rotation, which I'm going to draw on our board in a second, is this, right? We have rotation about x. So if this is sitting on the x-axis, we can rotate it. We can rotate about the y-axis. And rotation about the z-axis is this. Okay. So with that in mind, we have rotation about x, which is little u, rotation about y, which is little v, and rotation in z, which is little w. So we have rotational degrees of freedom. So we've got big X, big Y, and big Z. They're typically written in capitals. Now, little u, little v, and little w. I mean, they're all different letters, so the capitalization really don't matter, right? Okay. So any part we're defining can be controlled in these degrees of freedom. We've got 6. 3 translation, 3 rotation. It depends what you're controlling as to how many degrees of freedom that you need to take away. Some geometric controls say a flatness, right? There's no datum reference. No degrees of freedom are removed to check flatness, right? Flatness is totally unconstrained. Whereas something like parallelism, right, we're going to constrain to a datum reference. Now, parallelism, we often only need to take away one datum reference, right? So that's going to take away 3 degrees of freedom. Let me show you what I mean. Right, so here's our little block. Let me draw that more better. So let me draw, here's a little rendition of that block I was just showing you. So I'm going to apply this parallelism to the top, to A. I'm going to make that bottom A. Okay. Now, we switch over to our screen here. Zoom out a little bit. Here's our indicator. This is how we would check that parallelism. So the idea is we take our indicator, we put datum A right here on our surface plate, and then we can move our indicator down till we're touching just a little bit more. Put a little preload on it, right? And now we can run this back and forth. I don't know, it's hard for me to watch it. You just saw that needle fall in that hole. But the idea is we're going to move that around, and we can eventually get a parallelism reading, right? Now, we're only taking away the 3 degrees of freedom. Exactly which ones? Right? Let's come back to our little triad here. What did we take away? Well, first, we can't translate in Z anymore, right? Because we're stuck to the table. We also cannot rotate about the x-axis, right? And then we can also not rotate about the y-axis. Now, one way to think about it is, okay, well, what's left, right? I usually think about it as what's left, right? We can translate in x, translate in y, and we can rotate in z. Okay, so for that parallelism, we only needed to take away 3 degrees of freedom to measure that, right? That's all that's required. Taking away more degrees of freedom wouldn't affect the actual measurement. Now, right, we could, right? I could take away all 6 degrees of freedom and then measure the parallelism, right? We're not going to get like a bad measurement or anything as long as datum A is primary. It just doesn't affect, right, this surface to this table. Okay, now let's get a little bit more in depth, right? We want to take a look. Do I have? Yeah, I should continue using this block. We'll continue with our block here. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going crazy. Oh, jeez. Man, I can just not draw today. Oh, come on. Okay. It took longer than I expected to draw this for some reason. So we're going to go A, B, and C. Some of you may have seen this example before, but I think it's pretty good to illustrate what we have going on. I'm not going to chat today about datum qualification or anything. Just assume they're qualified to the data reference frame. So what I mean is A would have a rule number 1 or form, B would have a perpendicularity to A, C would have perpendicularity to A and B. Okay. So in order for our degrees of freedom to mean anything, right, we need to know what the datum reference frame is. Is it ABC? Is it BAC? Is it CAB? Is it A? You know, are there material condition modifiers? All sorts of stuff can go on. Well, the simple part like this, maybe not so much, but we're going to go to A, B, and C. Okay. In our datum reference frame, right, our order of precedence, right, means that our primary is going to take away as many degrees of freedom as that feature can, right, as it physically can. So we've established that a plane will take away 3 maximum. That's all it can take away. The secondary, right, whether it's B, A, C, or any other letter, will take away as many degrees of freedom as it can. Okay, so even though in this part, right, datum B is still going to be a plane, it won't take away 3 degrees of freedom, right? And I'll just give it away. It's going to take away 2 degrees of freedom. Right? Let me show you why. Right, so we established datum A, right? I think, yeah, this is already marked. Takes away 3. If we push something up against, well, I got this marked backwards, but we'll call this datum B. We push it up against this angle plate. Now we've taken away translation and X, right? Now it can't move that way anymore. And we've taken away rotation and Z, right? The only thing this block can do now is translate in the Y direction, okay? Which is good, right? Recall, we're going to be measuring from our datum simulators, right? So if we're going to measure the position of these 2 holes, we'd have the X, that's fine, right? But we still need a direction to measure from and Y, right? It's not clear right now. If our drawing just had A and B, we wouldn't know whether they're measuring from this side, this, or from the center for some reason. Okay. So A takes away 3, B takes away 2, C takes away 1. Those of you with a machining background probably recognize this 3-2-1 principle. This is how we can immobilize a part with planar datums, right? It just makes sense. Now, of course, all parts aren't going to be like this. But even if, say, datum B, right, was a center plane, right? So let me draw that a little bit different. Say datum B is a center plane. it's still going to take away 2 degrees of freedom. It's just more difficult to actually accomplish that, right? So planes are interesting that way, right? They're going to take away that 3 degrees of freedom maximum, but it depends where they are in that feature control frame, in that order of precedence. Okay, next. Of course, all features aren't planes, right? We can have circular features or cylinders. All right, so we'll take a look at a very simple cylindrical type feature here. I probably should have drawn it the other orientation, but this will be okay. All right, so let's identify this side as datum A and say we're going to control this other diameter to datum A. So what's going to happen here, right, if we grab this part and say this one, say a V block like this. I know it's a kind of wacky looking part, but the idea is we're going to simulate this yellow. We put it in our V block here, and now we've taken away, right, come back to our triad here, its ability to translate up and down in Z, translate in Y. It's actually free to translate an X. I know it doesn't seem like it, but this surface right here, this backside, is not controlled, right? So it's free to translate, but it cannot rotate an X, Y, in this case in Y, trying to show it this way, and it can't rotate this way, but it's free to rotate about X, right? Because it can spin. So that's going to be 4 degrees of freedom for a cylinder, right? Only if it's primary, though. If it's not primary, it won't necessarily take away 4. Now, for a typical part, that's good enough to control the coaxiality. You actually don't really need a datum B here, right? So if I do datum B on a cylindrical part, it doesn't really affect the measurement, right? Because datum A, right, this is where our, if we're looking at this surface as far as like the parallelism to the datum axis, that's where that's going to come from. Datum B isn't going to affect it at all. So you often see this with like a run out, right? It'll have datums A and B when datum B really isn't really doing anything. It doesn't hurt anything, right? It's not bad. It's just, you know, keep in mind that when you're setting up, you don't really have to stress about that, because datum B is just limiting translation, right, along this axis, but translation won't affect this measurement. Now, it would affect it if it was a conical feature or a sphere or something, which we'll get into in a little bit here. Okay. So that's our cylinder, taking away 4 degrees of freedom. Why don't we flip this around? What if we did B, A, right? Now B, just like any other plane, is going to take away 3 degrees of freedom. But we'd still need A if we're going to measure, you know, the run out of this, right? It's got to spin about the axis of A. So B takes away 3 degrees of freedom. A, in this case, is going to take away 2 degrees of freedom. It's going to take away the ability to translate let's call this X and Y. I'm going to call this coming out of the page Z. It'll limit the ability to translate in X and Y. The only thing this part is free to do is rotate about what I've called the Z axis here. Okay, let me check questions real quick. Okay, yeah, so hi everybody. The question was, so I got a question. Why do some drawings have more than 3 datums on a part, and what is the purpose of it? So if you have a part, right, where a feature control frame is like A, B, C, and then somewhere else on the part it's like A, B, D, and then maybe even you have A, B, you might have, I don't know, A, D, E, right? That's fine. That just means you have multiple datum reference frames, right? That's totally allowed. Typically happens with larger parts. What it allows inspection to do is just measure and kind of set up from different areas of the part. Instead of having 1, 0, 0, 0, you've got multiples. The problem with that is you can get relative shift where your tolerance stack up can do wacky stuff, and it's kind of difficult to pick up on. You cannot have more than 3 compartments here. Now what you could have, especially on a cylindrical part, you might have A, B, and C, right? Maybe for circular runout, you might have something like that. Position, possibly. You might have something like this. This is going to be more letters. You might have A, MMC, B, and MMC, and then, I don't know, D at MMC, right? That can happen. But there'll never be more than 3 datums. Now, when we have common datum features, so what I'm saying is A hyphen B, there's only one datum, right? There's a single datum axis that's the result of multiple features. Okay. Can the plain datum is secondary and the datum line is primary? So the question is, can the plain datum is secondary and a datum line is primary for? Yes. So I think the question is basically, can I have a plane parallel to a line? As far as I know, that's basically okay. What you can kind of see is once in a while you'll see a drawing where they'll point to a surface, right, of like this cylinder, of like, hey, parallel, and it'll say something like individual elements. So what it's telling inspection is, obviously you can't have the surface of a cylinder be parallel because the cylinder itself isn't flat, right? So you just check one spot. So it's kind of like straightness to a datum, right? Which I don't know why that isn't a thing. But this is possible. Now they want you to use a profile of a line and have a customized datum reference frame, which I think is more difficult. But I don't really see why you couldn't. The problem is finding a datum line. You can sort of use datum targets. And it's kind of like this situation, yeah, where you have, it's kind of a datum, or you're controlling the parallelism of a line element to an axis. So yeah, Isabel, you have to give me like an example or something. Okay. So we covered all that. Now I want to get into like the good stuff. This is the main example I wanted to cover today. And so the cone goes that way. So I actually happen to have one. This is a ball joint. Right, I pulled this out of, I had a 2005 Honda Civic, and I bought cheap ball joints one time, and this is what happens. If you can see this motion, it moves in and out about a 1/4 inch. It's probably 10,000 miles on this thing. Right? They just didn't last any time at all. But the idea is it's got a sphere on one end, and then this is a cone, right? So this cone gets jammed into like a control, wait. yeah, it gets jammed into the spindle, and this part, the cylindrical part right here, gets jammed into the control arm, and then obviously gets tightened right here. So why do I bring this little part up? Well, it's got two interesting features on it. Right, we've got a sphere, so we can use our spherical diameter of some diameter. And then we're going to have this cone, which I'm not going to dimension. I'm just going to put a profile of something on it. So let's say we're trying to control, I don't know, the position of this feature. Oh, geez, I need a diameter symbol, so we're going to control the position. So the question is, what should be the primary datum feature, right? Should the sphere or this cone? So the cone or the sphere. Well, let's do both. Well, I'll show one then the other. So let's make this sphere datum A, and we'll make the cone datum B. So if we make the sphere our primary datum feature, this is going to take away 3 degrees of freedom, and it's going to be 3 translational degrees of freedom. With the sphere, right, our datum is going to be a center point in that sphere, and it's going to limit the motion in all 3 directions. But it's a sphere, so it can rotate freely, right? Which in this part is going to be okay, because we're essentially going to measure, right, where the axis of this feature is, and it's going to kind of point, right? If you can imagine that axis, and kind of point back to that center. The rotation doesn't really matter, right? And we'll do the same thing with this. We'll control the profile of this back to A, right? And that works just fine. The difficulty is finding out where the center point is, right? Spheres are, notoriously not super easy to deal with. All right, what if we did datum B? So let's make the cone the primary datum. The cone's going to be a little bit different. Cones are weird. Let me show you. So here's a cone. If it's the primary datum, what we get from that is an axis and a point out in space, right? Axis plus a point. What the point does is limit translation left and right. The axis is going to take away 4 degrees of freedom, just like a cylinder. So when we use a cone, we're going to take away 5 degrees of freedom. The only thing that's left is rotation. The problem with using a cone is that, especially with the kind of slight taper here, all of our measurements need to come from way out here to be kind of kosher with ASME, right? We can't just manually make one of these convenient surfaces, datum B, and just measure from there. The way it's defined, without doing a customized datum reference frame, which maybe we'll have time to talk about, all of these measurements should come from the intersection of the, the apex or whatever of that cone, because that is part of that datum, that datum structure, right? Just by calling out B, I can't say, oh, well, I'll just call out A because I want to dimension everything from the center of the sphere. Because, again, with order of precedence, the primary takes away all the degrees of freedom possible. The secondary doesn't do anything, right, in this case. So let's take a look, right? What if we wanted to take all of our measurements, right, from the sphere instead of out in space? Okay, how would we accomplish that? Let me clean this up a little bit. First, on the actual drawing and in this example, we've got to specify our coordinate system, right? So I've got to say, hey, I'm going to call moving about the axis of this ball joint here Z, call moving up and down relative to our paper a Y, and I'm going to call moving toward us X. Right? That's going to be my given coordinate system here. So what I'm going to do with our feature control frame is I want to leave translation in Z to A, right? I want to force A to be our 0, right? I want 0, 0, 0 to be right here. So and I like to do these feature control frames backwards, right? So it's going to be A controls Z, right? That's going to be the degree of freedom I specifically want A to control. Unfortunately, I can't just do that and have, process of elimination kick in. It'd be cool if we could do that, but we can't. I've got to go through now, and this is a trickier part. I've got to figure out what degrees of freedom exactly does B take away. Okay. So it's going to take away X and Y, right? Those are translational degrees of freedom. X, Y. And it's also going to take away, right? So X has little u, Y has little v, Z has little w. It's also going to take away little u and little w. The only thing that's going to be left over is little w. Yeah, wait. Did I say little w? Little u. I'm sorry, v. I think I was talking about little w and I accidentally wrote it down. Okay, little v. The only thing left over is little w. So what this has the effect of doing is forcing, right, a different 0 point on your drawing. There's a similar example of this in Y14.5. The example they give, and I use it in classes and stuff too. Looks like this, right, a little cone shape thingy. So that order of precedence, right, really, really matters. The customized datum reference frame, I don't recommend putting this on drawings, right? People are going to really freak out. It's difficult to understand. But once you get it, right? It's pretty neat. Okay, let me switch. So Santiago, sorry I've been slacking. I know you sent me those drawings. Let me find those and let's talk about that electric motor. I know I got it in here somewhere. Oh, that's not the presentation. Okay. So this is a drawing somebody sent me, and well, this isn't a drawing. This is a sweet 3D model. So let me go through a couple of these. So we've got a typical rotating assembly kind of going on here, right? We've got bearings, right? These bearings are going to be assumed pressed into this blue part, right? And we've got the shaft sitting in here. That's all good. The yellow part appears to be connected to the base, and then we've got these blue parts kind of bolted on there. So a part like this, if they could assemble it and then bolt down the blue part, it makes life way easier. I don't think that's probably how it's done. So there's got to be kind of a tolerant stack up. And what I mean is, if there's error on these screws, right, this pattern of holes in this blue plate, and this whole thing gets shifted down, and then this whole thing is shifted up, it could cause everything to be kind of cockeyed, right? And that's going to make the bearings and everything run bad. let me switch, right, a couple more views of this. So here is the drawing, and I want to say he's got sent me two. Okay, yeah. So the idea here is we've got two different kind of understandings of those plates, right? Let's just focus in on this one first. Here we're saying datum B is going to be this diameter, and I want to say it's going to be this right here, this kind of inside mating diameter. Let me switch back one more slide here. Okay, I think I see what's going on. So right here, this lip, right? I want to say that is what's going to locate, right? So this purple lip is the face of it. So that's going to fit in that big yellow part. That way you're not relying on those holes to locate, which is great. That's how I would do it too, 100%. You don't want to rely on, clearance holes to locate your part. Okay, that makes sense to me. Datum A is that flat surface. That also makes sense to me. So I want to say, let me switch. Now I'm a little confused. I thought datum's A, B. Sorry if this is giving you a headache. I'm trying to. So datum. Oh, okay. We're good. Okay. So in this one, datum B is going to be secondary, which kind of feeds into what we've been talking about. Datum A we've got defined as this flat surface, right here. Okay. So in all our feature control frames, datum A is going to take away 3 degrees of freedom. Datum B is going to take away the next two. So the thought process with this version is if the perpendicularity of this mating feature right here is more important than the location in X and Y, this is the way to go, which might be the case, right? It's very possible that that bearing is going to kind of locate itself to some extent, but the perpendicularity or the parallelism of this, right, to the shaft that's going to ride in there matters more. So our geometric control, we've got a position to A, B, and C. That's cool. And cylindricity, that's fine. So I think this drawing is done to ISO. In ASME, you don't have to have datum C. And ISO, I'm really not sure. I'm not an expert on ISO drawings. Okay. Now, I think personally I like this one more because I would think that the X and the Y of that hole really matters. Yeah, ISO, okay. So in this case, we're saying, hey, this diameter is like the most important thing. I think that's going to be correct. I think when you fit this part together, that diameter is going to locate this hole, and it's going to kind of locate these holes, right? So it gets everything located. When you bolt it together, maybe it flexes a little bit, but personally, I like that location. It's doing two things. This datum A is going to locate. It's also going to help with your fit, right? Because if we make, let me draw a little picture here. If we make datum B the primary, right, we could end up with this, where we're making full contact here, but our actual, mating feature could be kind of crooked. What we want, and what this drawing is kind of showing, is this situation where we'd be more happy if we get a good fit, right, with our datum A feature here. And what that's going to do is locate everything, like I mentioned, in this X and Y direction. I think that's going to be the way to go there. So we got a comment, but in the first datum system, datum line also constraining the position. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, Santiago. I'm not saying it's in this first one. I'm not saying nothing is controlling the location. It's just order of precedence wise, the design intent being brought across here is that the orientation matters more than the location, right? Because we're getting plane to plane contact before we get an axis to axis alignment. Oh, wow, we've already gone 45 minutes. Whoa. Whoa. All right, let me take a breather real quick. Yeah, feel free to put any questions in there if you got them. Yeah, Santiago, sorry it took so long to get to this for you. I know you sent it to me a couple of weeks ago, and I can get to the other one you sent next time. These are good examples, right? I think a lot of people kind of wonder about these datum reference frames and how to deal with it and exactly what you're supposed to do. And of course, the answer is it depends, right? But I've always thought if you, even if it's going to be more difficult to produce it or measure it or whatever, if you can get your design intent across, right? I think that's really the way to go in most situations. All right, I'm gonna check the. Here we're live. Okay. Okay, guys. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to cover. I really wanted to go for like 30 minutes, but 45 is cool too. Sorry I missed last week. I was out of town. I was in Florida teaching this to a pretty cool company down there. So that was very exciting. And whenever I get to go to these companies and do this training live, I always try to, within the bounds of NDAs, bring back some knowledge to share with anybody. And this whole datum reference frame really got me thinking about how important this is and how easy it could be to overlook. People learning, you get used to seeing these symbols, you're like, oh, straightness, circularity, position. I think people kind of focus on the symbology a little bit too much when these concepts of translation and rotation and order of precedence really probably matter a little bit more for most things. Okay, so I'll give it about 30 seconds or so, and then I'll end this. If you have any questions, shoot them in, and I can answer them. Otherwise, I'll be getting back to my Monday here. Okay, guys. Well, glad everybody showed up again. My regulars, I do recognize you guys that say hi at the beginning. I'm still torn on reading out people's full names. I'm not sure if I really should or not. I'll figure it out at some point. But so I'll catch you next time.